The Roman Empire, one of the greatest states in human history, left behind a legacy that continues to shape our world today. We tend to think of Rome in terms of its military might, disciplined legions, brilliant generals, and invincible gladius swords. All of these images are certainly true, but they are only part of the picture. The true strength of Rome lay not only in its army. Behind every military success were far more subtle and sophisticated instruments of power that allowed the Roman Empire not only to conquer, but also to hold vast territories for centuries. The Romans were pragmatists. They understood that it was impossible to rule the world by relying solely on brute force. Conquest is one thing, but maintaining power and governing a vast empire is quite another. These tools were not forged from iron or steel. They were created from ideas, principles, and social constructs. These were invisible but extremely effective mechanisms that conquered peoples without a single blow. They were so effective that we can still see their legacy today. Watch the video to the end to find out how the Roman Empire conquered peoples without a single blow. Roman law was perhaps one of the most powerful and enduring tools of Roman power, and it was less like a weapon in the usual sense. Unlike laws based on tribal customs or religious dogma, Roman law was systematic, logical, and universal. It regulated all aspects of life, from private property to state relations. It was not just a system of rules, but a whole way of thinking that allowed Rome to govern a vast and diverse empire. The law gave every citizen, regardless of their origin, clear rules by which they could live and act. This predictability was critical to stability. The Romans created a system of precedents where court decisions became the basis for future decisions. This ensured predictability and fairness, which was very important for stability. Roman law was so perfect that it became the basis for the legal systems of many modern states. It became a tool that allowed many peoples with different traditions and beliefs to be integrated into the empire. Thanks to uniform laws, Rome created a sense of community and belonging, where everyone from Britain to Egypt could feel part of a single legal field. It was not just a weapon, but a kind of software that governed the vast and complex system of the empire, making it more efficient and stable. The Roman legal system was also very flexible and adaptable. It could be changed and supplemented, allowing it to remain relevant for centuries. For example, praetors could create new legal norms to solve problems that were not covered by the old laws. This ability to evolve and adapt made Roman law incredibly resilient. It could adapt to new social and economic conditions, which was critical for governing an ever-expanding empire. This flexibility allowed Rome to maintain control over its territories without resorting to constant violence. Moreover, the judicial process itself, with its clear procedures and logic, served as a powerful tool for legitimizing authority. Provincial residents, seeing how Roman courts resolved their disputes, began to trust the system and, as a result, Rome itself. It was a kind of social contract, where Rome provided order and justice in exchange for loyalty. A key element of this system was the distinction between ius civile, the law governing relations between Roman citizens, and ius gentium, the law of nations, which applied to relations with foreigners. This division allowed Rome to interact flexibly with conquered peoples without immediately imposing the full weight of Roman traditions on them. Later, with the spread of citizenship, these two concepts increasingly merged, creating a single legal basis for the entire empire. Outstanding jurists such as Gaius, Ulpian, and Papinian played a major role in the development of law, whose works and commentaries form the basis of all Roman jurisprudence. They did not simply interpret the laws, but also created coherent doctrines that explained the principles of law and its logic. Thanks to these efforts, Roman law became not just a set of rules, but a full-fledged scientific discipline. The culmination of this process was the codification of law under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century AD. His collection, known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled and systematized thousands of years of legal experience, becoming the main source of Roman law for subsequent generations and the foundation for European legal systems. In addition, Roman law served as a powerful tool for integration. When conquered peoples became part of the empire, they were offered Roman citizenship and, as a result, access to the Roman legal system. This was very attractive, as Roman law protected their property, gave them the opportunity to participate in trade, and ensured their safety. Thus, Roman law was not just a tool of control, but a powerful incentive for conquered peoples to become part of the Roman world. This created a sense of a single legal space where everyone could count on protection and justice. Such a strategy was much more effective than direct coercion. Roman law was not only a system but also an idea of order, justice, and civilization. This idea was so powerful that it conquered people's minds, making them loyal to Rome. They saw Roman law not as a tool of oppression, but as a means of improving their lives. It was a kind of invisible shield that protected the empire from internal conflicts. The Roman legal system was so perfect that it still inspires lawyers and legal scholars around the world. The spread of Roman citizenship, and consequently Roman law, was one of the most far-sighted political moves in history. At first, citizenship was granted only to the Italian allies, but later this practice spread throughout the empire. This not only gave the conquered peoples rights, but also created a single, universal legal order that was understandable and accessible to everyone. In 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla issued an edict that granted Roman citizenship to virtually all free inhabitants of the empire. This act, known as the Constitutio Antoniniana, was the culmination of a process that had lasted for centuries. It erased the legal differences between the center and the provinces, creating a single legal space in which all citizens, regardless of their origin, were equal before the law. Although this edict had fiscal objectives, expanding the tax base, it also helped strengthen loyalty to Rome. Provincials who had previously been outsiders now became full participants in the Roman world. They could hold public office, participate in court proceedings, and inherit property under Roman law. This was a powerful incentive for integration and created a sense that the empire was not just an instrument of oppression, but a community in which everyone could find their place. The universality of Roman law also contributed to the development of trade and the economy. Uniform rules for concluding contracts, protecting property, and resolving disputes greatly simplified business relations throughout the empire. This created a stable and predictable environment that was necessary for prosperity. In addition, Roman law had a huge influence on the development of law in Europe. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Justinian Code was rediscovered and became the basis for the legal systems of many European states. The principles of Roman law, such as equality before the law, the presumption of innocence, and the protection of private property, formed the basis of modern civil law. Roman law has become not just a legacy of the past, but a living and evolving source that continues to inspire lawyers around the world. It was not just a weapon, but a kind of cultural DNA that was passed from one civilization to another and still defines our understanding of justice and order. The influence of Roman law on the modern world cannot be overstated. It forms the basis for civil law systems that operate in most of Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Concepts such as property law, contract law, inheritance law, and criminal law were systematized and developed by Roman lawyers. Even in countries with Anglo-Saxon legal systems based on case law, the influence of Roman law is noticeable, especially in areas such as international law and property law. The study of Roman law is mandatory for many lawyers, as it allows them to understand the logic and evolution of legal systems. It teaches them to think systematically and analyze legal problems from different angles. Roman law was not just a set of rules, but a philosophy that asserted that the law must be fair, rational, and universal. This idea that the law must be above the arbitrary power of the authorities became one of the core values of Western civilization. Thus, Roman law was not just a tool of domination, but the foundation on which the entire empire was built. It united millions of people, regulated their relations, ensured justice, and created conditions for prosperity. Without Roman law, the Roman Empire probably would not have lasted so long and left such a rich legacy that still influences our world today. Do you agree that Roman law was the main reason for the empire's longevity? Or were there other, more important factors? I look forward to reading your opinions in the comments. For Rome, roads were not just convenient means of communication, but vital arteries that bound the empire together. They were built not only for trade and the movement of citizens, but primarily for the rapid deployment of legions. Roads allowed the Roman army to reach the most remote provinces in the shortest possible time, suppress rebellions, and ensure border security. It was a tool that made Rome virtually omnipresent in its lands. The engineering skills of the Romans in road construction were remarkable. They created multi-layered structures that could withstand enormous loads and lasted for centuries. Alongside the roads, the Romans built an extensive system of aqueducts. These grandiose structures, which supplied water to the cities, were not only an engineering marvel, but also a tool of control and influence. The abundance of clean water allowed Rome to build huge cities with high population densities, providing comfort and health to its citizens. Aqueducts symbolize the greatness of Rome and its ability to manage natural resources. They were visible proof that Rome's power brought civilization and prosperity. Conquered peoples, seeing such structures, understood that they were not just invaders, but a civilization capable of great achievements. These technological achievements were powerful levers of soft power that integrated conquered peoples into the imperial system. They convinced people that being part of Rome was profitable, safe, and prestigious. Road construction was a real science. The Romans used a multi-layered technique, starting with digging a trench, filling it with large stones, statumen, then smaller gravel with cement, rudis, and on top of that, a layer of gravel and sand, nucleus. On top of all this, massive stone slabs, summum dorsum, were laid to form a solid and smooth surface. Ditches were built on the sides of the road to drain water, and every 1,500 meters, a Roman mile, milestone markers, miliaria, were installed to indicate the distance to Rome. These roads were not just military routes, but also the arteries of the economy, along which goods, taxes, and information flowed. The postal station system, cursus publicus, allowed imperial couriers to travel at incredible speeds, providing communication between the center and the most remote provinces. It was a kind of nervous system of the empire, which made it a unified, manageable organism. Thanks to this infrastructure, Rome was able to collect taxes efficiently, respond quickly to crises, and maintain order across vast territories. Roads and the postal service became symbols of Roman civilization, showing conquered peoples that their lives were now part of something bigger and more organized. Aqueducts, in turn, were masterpieces of hydraulic engineering. Engineers calculated the slope of the canal so that water would flow by gravity at a constant, barely noticeable speed, avoiding stagnation or the destructive force of the flow. Part of the canal ran underground, part on the surface, and famous arches were built to cross valleys. In some cases, inverted siphons were used, where water was lifted under pressure through pipes on the opposite slope. The water delivered to the cities was used not only for drinking, but also for public fountains, toilets, and, most importantly, for grandiose thermal baths, which were the heart of social life in every Roman city. These structures demonstrated not only technical superiority, but also Rome's concern for the well-being of its citizens. They created the illusion of paradise on earth, where access to clean water and hygiene was a privilege that only the Romans could provide. The system of roads and aqueducts not only served practical needs, but was also a symbol of Roman power. They were a constant reminder of who controlled the land and its resources. These structures created a sense of stability and order that was very attractive to peoples living in conditions of constant conflict. The Roman infrastructure was so effective that many of these roads and aqueducts are still in use today, which speaks to the high quality of their construction. They became the foundation upon which the entire empire was built, and without them, Rome would never have become what it was. But which of these two systems, roads or aqueducts, was more important for strengthening Rome's power? The construction of roads and aqueducts had not only military and symbolic significance, but also enormous economic and social importance. Roads facilitated trade by allowing goods to be transported quickly and safely from one end of the empire to the other. This led to the creation of a single economic space, which stimulated production and contributed to the growth of the population's prosperity. Cities located along the main roads became major trading centers, where cultures mixed and goods were exchanged. The emergence of roads also accelerated the spread of Roman culture, language, and ideas. Soldiers, merchants, and officials traveling throughout the empire brought with them the Roman way of life, which was gradually adopted by the local population. This was a kind of cultural assimilation that took place without direct coercion, but thanks to the convenience and prestige of Roman civilization. Aqueducts, in turn, were the foundation of urban life. Without a constant supply of clean water, it would have been impossible to maintain hygiene and health in large cities. The Romans built huge public baths, which were not just places to wash, but centers of social life. Here people met, exchanged news, played sports, and spent time in pleasant company. The baths were open to all citizens, regardless of their social status, which helped to create a sense of community. In addition, aqueducts had political significance. Emperors and wealthy citizens often financed the construction and repair of aqueducts to gain popularity and demonstrate their generosity. This was an effective way to strengthen their power and legitimacy. The water supply system was so important that it was monitored by special officials, and any damage to an aqueduct was considered a serious crime. Thus, roads and aqueducts were not just engineering structures, but complex instruments of power that combined military strength, economic prosperity, social integration, and political propaganda. Without this infrastructure, Rome could never have become the vast and prosperous empire that it was. Roman infrastructure, especially roads and aqueducts, not only served its original purpose, but also had long-term consequences for the development of civilization. The road network built by the Romans remained the backbone of Europe's transportation system for centuries after the fall of the empire. Many modern roads in Italy, France, Great Britain, and other countries follow routes laid out by Roman engineers. This is a testament not only to their technical skill, but also to their foresight in planning. Aqueducts also had a huge impact on subsequent civilizations. The principles underlying their design were borrowed and refined in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, becoming the basis for modern water supply systems. The influence of Roman infrastructure can also be seen in other areas. For example, the Roman water supply system was so complex that it required an entire bureaucratic structure to manage it, which in turn contributed to the development of administrative skills and organization. In addition, these structures were a symbol of the Pax Romana, the peace that Rome imposed on the conquered peoples. The presence of roads on which merchants and goods could travel safely and aqueducts that sustained urban life created a sense of stability and order that was very attractive. The Romans did not simply conquer lands, they transformed them, creating conditions for prosperity and development. This infrastructure was not just a weapon of domination, but a tool that laid the foundation for a new civilization that outlived the empire itself. We see how Rome conquered peoples with stone and water, building roads and aqueducts. But how did it manage to turn yesterday's enemies into its most loyal allies? Watch the video to the end to find out the answer to this question. The Romans understood that long-term rule over a vast empire was impossible without integrating the conquered peoples. Therefore, they developed a unique strategy, the spread of Roman citizenship. At first, citizenship was granted only to the inhabitants of Rome itself, but over time it spread to the Italics and then to representatives of other conquered peoples. This was not just a formal act, but a powerful tool that gave people not only rights, but also a sense of belonging to a great empire. Roman citizenship gave the right to protection, participation in trade, and the opportunity to hold public office. This policy was very effective, as it created a powerful incentive for conquered peoples to cooperate with Rome. Instead of constantly fighting rebellions, Rome offered them participation in its project. It was a kind of social contract that gave conquered peoples the opportunity to improve their situation and become part of something bigger. As a result, Rome managed to turn its former enemies into loyal allies. The provinces where citizenship was granted became more loyal and stable, which significantly reduced the burden on the army. This was not direct violence, but a clever political game that allowed Rome to maintain power for centuries. It was one of the most subtle and effective tools in Rome's arsenal, allowing it to rule a vast empire without the need for a permanent military presence. Throughout the history of the Roman Republic and Empire, the process of extending citizenship had its own characteristics and stages. At first, after the Latin War, Rome began to grant so-called Latin rights to the inhabitants of neighboring cities, which gave them some of the rights of Roman citizens, but without the right to vote in Rome. Later in 90-88 BCE, after the Social War, citizenship was granted to all inhabitants of Italy, which was a turning point in the history of the peninsula and forever linked its fate to Rome. This step turned former allies and enemies into full members of Roman society. During the empire, emperors such as Caracalla extended citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire, Edict of 212 AD, which was the culmination of this policy. As a result, Rome ceased to be a city-state and became a universal empire in which millions of people, from Britain to Mesopotamia, had the same rights and obligations. This integration created a unified identity that was stronger than ethnic and regional differences. Citizenship provided not only legal but also economic advantages. Citizens were exempt from certain taxes, had the right to legal protection anywhere in the empire, and could participate in trade. This contributed to the creation of a single market, which stimulated economic growth and prosperity. Conquered peoples, seeing Roman citizenship as the key to a better life, were willing to serve in the Roman legions, pay taxes, and adopt Roman culture, which made them part of the Roman world. This was one of the most subtle and effective tools in Rome's arsenal, allowing it to rule a vast empire without the need for a permanent military presence. The spread of citizenship was much more than a legal act. It was a strategic tool for achieving loyalty and assimilation. The Romans did not simply conquer peoples, they incorporated them into their civilization. By granting citizenship, Rome gave the conquered elites the opportunity to integrate into Roman society, hold public office, serve in the legions, and ultimately become part of the ruling class. This created a strong incentive for cooperation and prevented uprisings. For the general population, citizenship opened the door to social mobility and the protection of Roman law, which was very attractive in an unstable world. In addition, citizenship contributed to the unification of the empire. Residents of different provinces, speaking different languages and having different customs, were now united by a common legal status. This helped to overcome regional and ethnic differences, creating a unified Roman identity. Citizens throughout the empire paid taxes, served in the army, and obeyed the same laws. This was the basis for the creation of a unified economic and political space, which made the empire more stable and governable. The Romans understood that an empire based solely on force could not last long. An empire based on common law and citizenship was much stronger. It was this flexible policy of assimilation that allowed Rome to survive for so long. Instead of destroying or enslaving the conquered peoples, Rome made them part of itself. Citizenship was the key to this process. It allowed conquered peoples to preserve their culture and traditions, while at the same time giving them access to the benefits of Roman civilization. This strategy was so successful that even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Roman identity and Roman law continued to live on in the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, and formed the basis of European civilization. One of the most effective tools of Roman power was its administrative system. The Roman Empire was divided into provinces, which were governed by governors appointed from Rome. They were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and managing the local population. This system allowed Rome to rule a vast empire without resorting to a permanent military presence. Although the governors had considerable power, they were accountable to Rome and had to follow Roman laws. This ensured centralized control and prevented corruption at the local level. Rome's administrative system was very flexible. It allowed them to integrate local elites into their system of government, which made them interested in maintaining Roman rule. Local aristocrats could hold government positions, obtain Roman citizenship, and participate in the administration of the empire. This created a sense that they were not simply conquered, but part of a great project. It was a very subtle and effective tool that allowed Rome to rule the empire without resorting to direct violence. However, how effective was this system really? The division of the empire into provinces allowed Rome to govern its vast territories with relative efficiency. Governors, who were most often former consuls or praetors, had military, judicial, and administrative authority in their provinces. Their main tasks were to collect taxes, maintain order, and protect the borders. However, their power was not unlimited. They were bound by Roman law and were under constant control from Rome. For example, any citizen could sue a governor for abuse of power. This system of checks and balances, although not always perfect, prevented governors from becoming independent rulers. Each province had a developed bureaucratic structure that assisted the governor in his work. The governor relied on Roman officials as well as local elites who were integrated into the system. This integration was a key element. as it made the local aristocracy interested in maintaining the Roman order. They gained access to power and wealth, and in exchange they ensured the loyalty of the local population. Over time, Rome's administrative system underwent changes. Under the emperors, it became more centralized. Governors began to be appointed directly by the emperor, and their terms of office became more limited. Later, during the Dominate period, Emperor Diocletian carried out a major reform, dividing the provinces into smaller units and creating a new administrative hierarchy to make the system more manageable and prevent uprisings. This reform, although very harsh, allowed the empire to survive for several more centuries. Ultimately, Rome's administrative system, with its centralized government, flexibility, and ability to integrate local elites, was one of the main reasons why Rome was able to maintain power over such a vast territory for centuries. The Roman administrative system was built on a delicate balance between centralization and local autonomy. Rome did not attempt to completely destroy local customs and traditions. On the contrary, it often used them for its own control. In cities that were granted civitas status, local self-government was relatively broad. Citizens could elect their magistrates, pass local laws, and manage their finances. However, all these cities were linked to Rome through a tax system and common laws. This approach allowed Rome to govern a vast empire without having to interfere in every detail, making the system more efficient and less costly. In addition, Rome actively employed Greek and Eastern officials in its administration, who were well acquainted with local conditions. This made governance more efficient and helped avoid conflicts. The Roman administration was not just a system of control, but a tool for gathering resources and maintaining order that worked for the benefit of the entire empire. Tax collection was vital for financing the army, building roads and aqueducts, and maintaining a huge bureaucratic apparatus. Governors were responsible for collecting these taxes, and although this often led to abuse, the system itself was very effective. Thus, the Roman administrative system was a complex and multifaceted tool that included centralized control, local autonomy, and the integration of local elites. This balance allowed Rome to govern a vast empire without resorting to constant violence, and was one of the main reasons why Rome was able to maintain its power for centuries. The army played a key role in Rome's administrative system, performing not only military but also civil functions. The legions stationed in the provinces were not just garrisons. They built roads, bridges, aqueducts, and cities, thereby contributing to the development of infrastructure and civilization. Soldiers often served as police forces, maintaining order and suppressing banditry. Veterans, after completing their service, received land in the provinces, which contributed to Roman colonization and the spread of Roman culture. Moreover, the army was a kind of social ladder. Provincials who served in the Roman legions were granted citizenship, and their children could become full members of Roman society. This was a powerful incentive for recruitment and loyalty. Thus, the army was not just an instrument of power, but a key element of the administrative system that contributed to integration, infrastructure development, and the spread of Roman culture. Without this multifunctional role of the army, Rome's administrative system would have been much less effective. The army was an integral part of the empire's governance, ensuring both its security and its development. The army, laws, roads, all of these were instruments of power. But did Rome have an instrument capable of conquering not bodies but souls? The answer is coming soon. The Romans understood perfectly well that persuasion was much more effective than coercion. One of the most powerful tools in their arsenal was indirect propaganda. It worked not through direct appeals, but through symbols and rituals. The most striking manifestation of this strategy was triumphs. When a commander returned to Rome after a significant victory, he was greeted as a hero. A solemn procession passed through the streets of the city, demonstrating the greatness of Rome and its invincibility. In front of thousands of citizens, the victor, crowned with a laurel wreath, rode in a chariot followed by trophies, prisoners, and legions. This was not just a celebration, but a carefully planned show that strengthened the citizens' faith in the power of the state. Less large-scale but no less effective tools were also used as part of this propaganda. For example, coins were minted with images of emperors and military leaders, as well as scenes of their victories. The coins circulated throughout the empire, and their images served as a constant reminder of who ruled and why. Huge monuments, arches, and columns dedicated to military victories were erected in the most prominent places. All this created a unified, majestic image of Rome, which was an integral part of every citizen's self-awareness. To the conquered peoples, this demonstrated the futility of resistance, and to the Romans, the greatness of their own civilization. It was a tool that shaped worldviews and beliefs, making them a much more durable foundation of power than any army. Roman propaganda was so skillful that it still influences our perception of the empire today. The triumph was not just a parade, but a complex religious and political ritual designed to demonstrate divine favor toward Rome and its commander. The triumphant general was dressed in a purple-trimmed toga, reminiscent of Jupiter's robes, and his face was painted red to symbolize his connection with the gods. Behind him stood a slave holding a laurel wreath over his head and whispering, "Memento mori," remember death, reminding him of the transience of earthly glory. The procession began at the Field of Mars, passed through the Roman Forum, and ended on Capitoline Hill, where the commander offered a sacrifice to Jupiter. This ritual, full of symbolism, was intended to reinforce the sacredness of Roman power. The spectators saw not just a man, but the embodiment of the divine power and greatness of Rome. In addition, the Romans skillfully exploited the cult of the emperor. After the emperor's death, he could be deified, and temples erected in his honor. This practice was not merely religious, but political. The veneration of the emperor as a deity created an additional level of loyalty and made any resistance to his power not only a political act, but also blasphemy. In the provinces, especially in the East, where the cults of rulers were widespread, this was a very effective tool. By organizing the cult, the local elites demonstrated their loyalty to Rome, and the common people received a new religion that connected them to the center of the empire. In addition to triumphs, Rome used architecture as a powerful means of propaganda. Arches, such as the Arch of Titus or the Arch of Constantine, were erected in honor of great victories and decorated with reliefs depicting battles and triumphal processions. Trajan's column in Rome, for example, was a spiral relief that told the story of the victorious war in Dacia, step by step, from beginning to end. These monuments served as history textbooks for the illiterate population, showing them how Rome conquered its enemies and brought civilization to wild lands. Even in the provinces, where the Romans built cities, theaters, amphitheaters, and baths, these structures served as propaganda, demonstrating the superiority of the Roman way of life. The construction of such grandiose buildings as the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus, and the imperial forums also served as a powerful means of propaganda. They demonstrated the wealth and power of Rome, as well as the emperor's concern for the welfare of their citizens. These public spaces were not only places of entertainment, but also centers of political life, where the emperor could communicate with the people and demonstrate his generosity. The organization of gladiatorial games and chariot races, known as bread and circuses, distracted the people from political problems and created a sense of stability and prosperity. Roman propaganda also worked through literature and art. Poets and historians such as Virgil and Titus Livius created works that glorified Roman history and mythology. Virgil's Aeneid, for example, linked the founding of Rome to the legendary Aeneas, hero of the Trojan War, and thus gave Roman history a divine meaning. This epic was not just a literary work, but a powerful tool that shaped Roman identity and explained Rome's superiority over other peoples. Sculptures of emperors erected throughout the empire were another propaganda tool. They did not simply depict rulers, but created an idealized image of a strong, wise, and godlike leader. These statues were a constant reminder of Rome's power. Roman propaganda was so sophisticated that its influence extended even to everyday aspects of life. For example, public education, although not universal in the modern sense, was aimed at creating loyal citizens. Children studied the history of Rome, its myths and values, which shaped their identity as Romans from an early age. This knowledge, passed down from generation to generation, became part of the collective memory and strengthened the unity of the empire. Another powerful tool was legislation. Roman law, which spread throughout the empire, established uniform rules and norms, creating a sense of order and justice. Of course, the laws served the interests of Rome, but for the conquered peoples, it meant predictability and protection. Thus, even in such seemingly utilitarian matters as law, the Romans found an opportunity to promote their values and the advantages of their rule. We have seen that the true power of Rome lay not only in its military might, but also in a number of invisible but extremely effective tools. These were not swords and spears, but propaganda, law, roads, economics, and political wisdom. It was these tools that allowed Rome to create and maintain a vast empire for centuries. However, which of these was Rome's most formidable and invincible weapon? We would love to hear your opinion. Which of these invisible weapons do you consider the most powerful? Was it a carefully thought-out legal system, pervasive propaganda, or perhaps the infrastructure that held the empire together? Share your thoughts in the comments. We are also very interested in what topics you would like to see in our next issues. Perhaps you are interested in the daily life of legionaries, the mysteries of the Roman gods, or the fate of gladiators. Tell us your ideas so we can create content that is interesting to you. To make sure you don't miss our new videos and learn more about the secrets of Roman civilization, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.